Hello, and welcome back to IADS Retail Park. If you're new here, I'm Maya, and this is where we take a closer look at the retail strategies, innovations, and transformations shaping department stores and the broader industry worldwide. Whether you're tuning in from the C suite, the shop floor, or somewhere in between, thanks for joining us. Today's conversation started with a question that came up during our mid year meeting in Seoul last June. IADS member CEOs visited some of Korea's most innovative retail spaces, including the Hyundai Seoul, which is massive, experiential, and designed to wow. But the store that generated the most questions wasn't the newest or the flashiest. It was Hyundai Apgujeong, a location that opened in 1985, hasn't changed much structurally in 40 years, and yet consistently produces 750 million euros in annual sales from just 33,000 square meters. So, what's the formula? How does a relatively small traditional department store outperform competitors that are twice or three times its size? The answer lies in something called VIC Architecture, and Korea has built an entire retail operating system around it. To help us understand what that actually means, I'm joined by Sylvain, who wrote this week's IADS exclusive on Hyundai Apgujeong and Korea's approach to very important customers. Sylvain, welcome.
Thanks, Maya. It's good to be here. Now, this was genuinely one of the most eye-opening retail visits I've experienced.
So let's start there. You were on that Seoul trip with the CEOs. What was it about Apgujeong that made everyone stop and take notice?
It's actually a perfect example of how the numbers can tell a story that the physical space doesn't immediately reveal. Apgujeong opened in 1985. It's only 33,000 square meters across 6 floors. There haven't been major structural changes in 4 decades, apart from renovating the food hall in 2023. Walk through it, and doesn't have the theatrical experiential design of the Hyundai Seoul. But here's the thing. It produces 750 million euros a year. That makes it the 7th best performing department store in Korea, ahead of stores that are 2 or 3 times its size.
And that productivity comes down to the VIC business, right? Very important customers. But Korea takes that concept to a level that's quite different from what we see in most Western markets. Can you walk us through how that works at Apgujeong specifically?
Sure. At Apgujeong, fewer than 5% of customers account for approximately half of the revenue. To put that in context, the top tier, called Jasmine Black, requires 94,000 euros in annual spending. The tier below that, Jasmine, requires 42,000 euros. And these aren't invitation-only thresholds that get whispered about. They're published. Any customer can look them up. That transparency is part of the system.
So you're spending close to six figures a year, and in return, what do you get? I'm assuming it's more than just lounge access.
And that's the key insight. And it's what CEOs on the visit started to realize once they dug into the numbers. Yes, there are lounges, dedicated spaces on multiple floors, including a rooftop atelier bar with a garden. But the lounges are the front end. The real economic engine is allocation control. Top-tier members get priority access to constrained luxury inventory, especially watches and high jewelry. They get appointment-based clienteling where inventory is pre-matched to them before it even hits the floor. They get same-day alterations, white glove delivery, and they're routed into high-margin categories where the ticket sizes compound. Often, these transactions happen in private rooms with both brand staff and store client advisors present.
So it's not about perks, it's about access to what's scarce.
Exactly, Maya. In a market where luxury supply is structurally constrained, the retailer who controls allocation controls revenue. And Korea has industrialized this. It's not just Hyundai, it's Shinsegae, Lotte, and Galleria too. Across the board, these generate between 43% and 51% of total department store sales. That share has roughly doubled in the past decade.
Let's talk about the demographic side of this, because one of the things that stood out in your article is that Korea's VIC cohort is getting younger. That's not what most people would expect when you're talking about customers spending 94,000 euros a year.
It surprised me too. In 2015, customers aged 20 to 39 accounted for less than 15% of Korea's big spenders. By 2024, at some locations like Hyundai Pangyo, they represent more than 30% of the VIC base. At certain Shinsegae branches in younger catchment areas, over 40% of VICs are under 45. These are customers with high disposable incomes, around 36,000 euros to 48,000 euros net annually, but without heavy family burdens. Korea has one of the world's lowest birth rates, so discretionary budgets that in other markets would go toward children are instead going into luxury, travel, and wellness.
And they're engaging with these programs differently than previous generations, right, Selvan? There's this concept you mentioned called flex culture.
Yes, that's right, Maya. The younger VIC cohort values ostentatious display, especially on social media. They want allocation access, but they also want experiences that signal membership. That's why Korean department stores have moved well beyond discounts. Shinsegae has partnerships with Michelin and Sotheby's. Lotte offers boutique hotel vouchers and NFT art masterclasses. Galleria's top lounge is 2,000 square meters with a 3,000 bottle wine cellar and an art gallery. These aren't perks. They're a parallel social world that spending 94,000 euros a year gives you access to.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the transparency around thresholds. You said Hyundai publishes the 94,000 euros figure. So do Shinsegae and Galleria. But in the West, most luxury retailers keep those numbers private. Why does Korea do it differently, and what does that transparency actually produce?
That's one of the most interesting strategic differences. In Korea, publishing the thresholds creates aspiration and gamification. It becomes a social signal. Customers know exactly what it takes to reach the next tier, and there's a clear path to get there. In the West, luxury retailers tend to treat high spend programs as invitation only, which maintains exclusivity but limits scale. Korea made a different bet that transparency would drive volume within the VIC cohort, and the data suggests it worked. You see year on year growth in VIC membership even as the thresholds rise.
And those thresholds have been rising. You noted in the article that it's becoming increasingly difficult to qualify as a VIC in Korea.
Yep. 10 years ago, the entry level VIP tier across most Korean department stores was around 1,400 euros a year. Today, it's 2,400 euros. And the top tiers have climbed even faster. Shinsegae's diamond tier is now 42,000 euros. Galleria's PSR White is 72,000 euros. And Hyundai's Jasmine Black is 94,000 euros. Even Lotte, which widened its base with a lower entry tier, tightened the top. Their annual prestige threshold is around 169,000 euros. The reason Korean retailers can keep raising the bar is that the wealth base keeps growing. Korea has $1.15 million millionaires, growing at 5.6% per year, and per capita luxury spending is $325, the highest in the world.
So there's a solid economic foundation under this. But I'm curious, what's the risk? If half your revenue comes from 5% of your customers, that seems like it could create fragility, especially if there's an economic downturn.
That's the trade-off. VIC dependency does create vulnerability. If the economy contracts and high net worth individuals pull back, stores like Apgujeong would feel it hard and fast. But Korean retailers have mitigated some of that risk through diversification, not just across customer tiers, but across services. Hyundai has a partnership with Hankyu in Japan to offer reciprocal VIC benefits starting in 2026. Lotte leverages its duty-free and hotel ecosystem to capture foreign VICs who now represent over 10% of sales at some flagships. Galleria reconfigured its Apgujeong location in 2022 specifically to push the VIC share even higher. It hit 51%, a national record. So the bet they're making is that the economics justify the concentration.
And at Apgujeong specifically, the economics do seem to hold. Selvan, in your exclusive, you described it as small but sharp, a format that's relationship dense rather than experiential. How does that compare to what Hyundai is doing at its newer Seoul flagship,
They're almost opposite strategies. The Hyundai Seoul is 89,000 square meters, and 40% of that space is dedicated to events, discovery, and experiential retail. It's designed to attract a broad audience and create theater. Apgujeong is 33,000 square meters, hard luxury heavy, and embedded in one of Seoul's wealthiest residential catchments. It doesn't need the theatrics because it's optimized for depth, not breadth. The right clients, the right inventory, and a membership architecture calibrated to very high spend. And here's what makes Korea remarkable. This isn't a one-off Maya. Across Hyundai, Shinsegae, Lotte, and Galleria, this VIC architecture is the operating system. It's market-wide infrastructure.
So, for a Western retailer listening to this, what's the takeaway? Can this model be replicated outside Korea, or is it too culturally specific?
I think the honest answer is both. Korea's model rests on specific conditions: dense urban wealth pools, income polarization, low birth rates that amplify discretionary spending, and a cultural comfort with transparent social signaling. Those conditions don't exist everywhere. But the question the model forces is universal. What is your top 5% actually worth? And are you organized to capture that value? Most Western retailers have those customers. They just haven't built the infrastructure around them. Korea shows what happens when you do. Whether that's transferable is a strategic decision each retailer has to make based on their own market. But pretending the question doesn't exist is probably the riskiest option.
That's a sharp way to frame it. Sylvain, this has been a really valuable conversation. For those who want the full breakdown, including the floor-by-floor tour, the allocation mechanics, and all the demographic data, you'll find the complete IADS exclusive linked in the episode description. Sylvain, thanks so much for walking us through this.
Thanks for having me, Maya. It's always good to dig into what the numbers are really telling us.
And there you have it, a look inside one of the most productive department stores per square meter in Korea, and a model that raises some uncomfortable questions for the rest of the retail world. If this conversation got you thinking, share it with a colleague who's wrestling with the same strategic questions. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss what we're unpacking next. You can find us on LinkedIn at International Association of Department Stores, read deeper dives on our Substack, or visit our website for more resources. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. This podcast uses AI cloned voices created with human oversight to ensure quality and accuracy.